Good evening. Welcome to the Solari Report. It's September 19th, 2013. This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and I'm delighted you could join me this evening. Our theme tonight is Life on the Wire. It's a quote from Kurt Valinda. Someone used it in a meeting the other day when one of their teammates was worried about the risks involved in the action they were taking, and he posted a quote from the trapeze artist, "Life is on the wire. Everything is just waiting around." Anyway, it reminds me of Steve Jobs' once saying, "Real artists ship." But as the change accelerates, we're seeing, it feels like everything's being stretched tight like the wire, and we're all having to exercise what I would call jump the curve, which means we have to reach out of our comfort zone because change is upon us. Upcoming events, I'm going to be speaking at the Casey Summit, at the Casey Summit Conference, October 4th, 5th, and 6th, 2013. That's coming up in the beginning of next month. Then I'll be at Breakthrough Energy Movement in Colorado, October 10th to 12th, and I'll be speaking there on crowdfunding. And then we're going to have a lunch for subscribers on October 12th, that last day at the conference. And then San Francisco, I'll also be speaking at the end of the month, and we're going to have a lunch with Catherine that we'll post next week. I wanted to mention again, we're going to a pre-record format. We've worked very hard to try and keep doing the live sessions, but we really cannot ensure quality recording for subscribers, and I think it's really important that you have that. We've created an email address at askcatherine@solari.com to make sure you can get your questions in. And I certainly love doing them live and having a live audience. At the same time, as I travel around, I'm just finding tremendous deterioration in the reliability of the telecommunications. And so we want to assure a certain quality for you. And we think the pre-record will work much better. Money in markets, the big story, of course, was the Fed surprised Wall Street and me. I thought we were going to see a reduction in the amount of bond buying they're doing every month, $85 billion. I was expecting a reduction of about $10 to $15 billion a month. Sure enough, no taper. Now, the headline this morning on Yahoo Finance was Ben sticks to his plan. And of course, if you look at the targets that Bernanke said that he wanted for the unemployment rate and some of the other targets, in fact, he is sticking to the plan. Now, he had tried to jawbone earlier this year, saying that the Fed was going to taper because they need to. And so the market expected a little bit of tapering, but I think Bernanke took a look at the employment numbers. In many parts of the country, it feels like the economy has literally stopped. And so I think the Fed just stuck to the plan that they had announced. But it was a surprise for Wall Street. It was a surprise for yours truly. The markets were up a lot, and part of the reason was Larry Summers withdrew his name from the Fed from consideration for the chairmanship. And I think many people, including me, breathed a sigh of relief. Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, I believe the architect of the gold suppression plan, and had been a senior White House economic advisor. And I simply think the association of Summers with leading and engineering the financial coup d'etat is really more than the country could bear. So it looks like we're going to have Fed Governor Yellen, who certainly will bring consistency to the job. One of the things that happened with the interest rates down and stock market up is the emerging markets, which have been quite in the doldrum, look more attractive. Sure enough, we've seen lots of market commentators advising everyone to get out of bonds in Asia, but we see KKR announcing a private debt fund for India and Asia. So just as retail is out there getting in. The sun mysteriously goes all quiet. Sunspots dropping to very low levels. Always an ominous sign for the stock market. I put the article up on the blog. The pushback on Syria is enormous. We see the Americans pushing hard for military action in Syria, and the pushback tremendous from around the globe, with Russia really leading the way in trying to prevent it. And really what we're seeing is sort of an oil card and market share game playing out in the Middle East. The Economist publishes a story on they called it the Week in West, pointing out that the way this game has played out has really hurt America, or certainly America's position. And certainly the Chinese and Russians are looking stronger in terms of Middle East energy. There's no doubt about it. Russia today calls UN chemical report on Syria biased, and Putin points out that he's planning on seeking a fourth presidential term, which is his way of saying, you're going to have to deal with me for 25 years. Where's the president's turnover? Of course, part of the pushback is more articles pointing out that Israel has 80 nukes. So what are we worried about? By far and away, they're the nuclear problem in the Middle East. We see a shooting at the Navy Yard. I suspect it's probably related because the controversy and debate within the leadership, including at the high levels of the military, and certainly the Navy being the most powerful part of the military, were significant. It wouldn't surprise me if that's connected. But it's one of those situations where you look at it and you say, there's a story here, but it's going to take me many, many hours to try and figure out, and we're probably not going to be able to do it. The backdrop on Syria, of course, is enormous divergence of resources going on around the world, and including in the United States. We see new reports that the U.S. super rich have hit a new wealth record 5 years after the financial crisis, and that everybody else is going in the opposite direction. So we're really seeing that divide. New studies, again up on the blog, show that government workers are downsizing. So government is no longer picking up the slack. It's going the other way. MIT Technology Review, very interesting report that suggests half of U.S. jobs are vulnerable to computerization. So, and that really underscores the kind of change that's accelerating. George Ure had an interesting debate on his website, Urban Survival, because he proposed taxes and Social Security and payroll taxes for every job taken away by the robotics. The idea being the robots should put money into Social Security. It's not a bad idea, but it's very interesting to see the pushback he got. One smart guy, in response to the kind of jump the curve situation that we're looking at in terms of income and employment, the mayor of Rockford, Illinois, tweeted Etsy's CEO and is now trying to create a partnership with Etsy, Etsy being a leading website on craft entrepreneurship. Meantime, part of this divergence is that the cash is piling up at large corporations, and we're seeing it's approaching $2 trillion of cash sitting at the big corporations. We see an article that I posted up on the blog in the Wall Street Journal this week, companies unplugging from the electric grid, delivering a jolt to utilities. As more and more companies pile up cash and can't find ways of investing it, what they're going to do is they're going to re-engineer their balance sheets to deflate their expenses, and that's exactly what we should be doing too. Don't be afraid to see what you can do for yourself or how you can re-engineer your energy costs by doing more for yourself. But utilities and businesses like it are really in for surprise competition from people who are looking to integrate in whole new ways down through their balance sheet and income statement. Very important continuing dynamic. It's much bigger than a story. It's an enormous dynamic. It's the fallout from the NSA continuing revelations. The BRICS in particular don't want that divergence that's been happening to us in the United States to happen to them. Make no mistake about it. A significant reason for the significant divergence in income is the fact that we're in front of the one-way mirror, and you have a very small group of people in society with access to the intelligence that can be harvested off an NSA platform, with defense contractors being able to read, see, and hear everything that everybody says and does over the digital networks. I had one great ally say there's no way they could watch more than 20,000 people. No, with computers and artificial intelligence, they can harvest economic knowledge and influence at a household level economic activity It's quite extraordinary, the machinery they've built. And the BRICS don't want that divergence of income to happen to them. They want to avoid what's been happening to us. And so a big blog post I have up on the effort for the BRICS to come up with an independent internet cable that cannot be harvested by the U.S. intelligence or the Anglo-American intelligence agencies. We saw another story on a Belgian telco saying it was hacked, with reports pointing to NSA or their friends as the problem. Again, I'm going to keep following this story, and I talk a lot about it in crowdfunding, because as the financial flows move out into the internet, whether it's payment systems, whether it's security transactions, whether it's currency and digital currency, the fight over who controls and who has access to what and where the American one-way mirror goes and who has access to that intelligence is going to be an incredibly important variable in the economy. I talk about in the crowdfunding interview the importance of maintaining privacy. If somebody's funding you, but through the back door they have access to all the information on all of your inventions before you get to file the patents or you get to sell the company, it's a whole different kettle of fish. So this issue of who has access to what on the internet and the balkanization of the internet as different sovereign nations and networks try to protect themselves from this kind of invasive force is just going to continue. Twitter files for, believe it or not, a private filing under the Jobs Act, which we're going to be talking about because it was the Jobs Act that authorized crowdfunding. But it was, Bloomberg noted that Twitter filing a private filing seeking secrecy was an interesting thing for a business that thrives on excessive sharing to do. Financial shenanigans. J.P. Morgan just settled today $920 million payout to try and settle the London whale scandal. J.P. Morgan Chase has been under a lot of fire recently, and it's always interesting to watch, because one thing to remember when you watch these kind of headlines is J.P. Morgan Chase and the big financial institutions, both as contractor, servicer, have many, many very intimate and significant roles on behalf of the federal government and as depository for the federal government. And as long as you don't see them fired from those roles or those contracts and relationship canceled, all these little squabbles are really about J.P. Morgan Chase kickbacking a percentage of the profits into the enforcers, and that's one of the ways they get their budget covered. So until you see them fired from the critical and intimate roles that give them access to information, give them access to trading with the federal credit and lots of other things, don't assume that they're getting beat up on too hard. Great concern over Obamacare. The polls are not in favor of Obamacare, a lot of the provisions thereof. We see the House GOP trying to finance or trying to tie new budgets and government funding to the health law. Meantime, we see corporations continuing to shift their health plans in ways that I think are not in the interest of their employees. And so we're really watching Obamacare turn into what I have always predicted it was part of lowering the boom on the legacy systems in a way that's not going to be in favor of the American people. Our hero tonight is Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of the Treasury and was, to me, the chief design of the Constitution of the United States. He was the organizer and leader of literally an editorial campaign which became the Federalist Papers, was the most vocal arguer to ban slavery within the Constitution, and of course it took many years later to the Civil War to do it. Alexander Hamilton was also a defender of the public debt. He was as the Secretary of Treasury, he was the one who argued that the U.S. government should honor its debts issued to finance the war. And I think the decision to do that, which of course made a whole lot of arbitrageurs rich who bought the paper up for pennies on the dollar, was critical to establishing the federal credit. He wrote several eloquent pieces on sort of arguing on behalf of integrity in the federal credit. And I bring up his name. When I was in the Bush administration, I used to constantly find myself defending the integrity of our credits up against a series of different political appointees who wanted to abrogate our contracts and abrogate our deals. And I would always leave the meetings dejected because the corruption was such a deeply imbued characteristic of life at HUD at that point. And I had a deputy who used to say, "Don't worry, Alexander Hamilton already had this fight, and Alexander Hamilton won." And it was one of the reasons when I created my company in Washington, I named it after Hamilton Securities. The reason I wanted to mention Hamilton was not only has he always been a particular hero of mine, but I think the most important thing we need to create an environment where we can start to do the kind of transactions and investments that are really going to revitalize and rebuild the household and community economy and help what I call reinvent the heartland into the digital heartland, integrate new technology, and do things like the crowdfunding that we talk about in the interview. What we need to have a culture where we respect and honor our covenants and contracts with each other. And that's a culture that has really not been present in America. Inside the matrix, inside the tapeworm, we see force standing behind contracts. But for those who've tried to go outside, it's very important to find and create that culture, and it's been lacking. And so when you think about how we can create alternative solutions and how we can start to shift our money into ways that start to rebuild the economy, think about how you and those around you can have integrity in terms of our contracts and our agreements, because that is one of the most important conditions precedent to real change. And I think Hamilton's insistence on that integrity helped facilitate the success of change once upon a time after the Revolutionary War. Ask Catherine, "Dear Solari, why is it so often after a precious metals market report from Franklin Sanders, something wild happens in the precious metals market within the next 24 hours? Yeah, sure enough, that's happened several times this year. I have no answer for it. I can assure you the precious metals market has a mind of its own, and so anything can happen. But yes, that has happened several times. You have mentioned a number of times that 50 trillion in assets have been transferred from the legacy economy into the new breakaway economy. Can you mention more specifically the different ways in which this transferred has happened, who specifically the people are who are getting this money into their hands, and how, in your opinion, this money will now be utilized?" I think there have been a number of different ways. I've talked extensively about them on the Solari report and written about them. I think the number one method was mortgage fraud, and that included not just mortgage securities, but derivatives. And that levered the laundering of a lot of narcotics trafficking and sort of illegal money. So a combination of narco dollars, mortgage fraud, and the derivatives on top, I think, was a very big source. I think missing money from the United States government and some of the laundering of that money levered the mortgage fraud. And the next one, which is securities fraud, including the telco pump and dump that we saw sort of burst in 2000. So that was internet stocks and telcos draining out, among other things, tremendous amounts of money from pension funds. Then I think the NSA machinery, this sort of one-way mirror, has been instrumental to harvesting and insider trading lots of small business and lots of individuals, not just here, but around the world. And finally, there are a series of other smaller ones, but if you go back into our articles page and you take a look, I would particularly encourage you to read the Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, because many of these different methods have been levered with government contracts and rigging government rules in a way that helps private parties pool capital. And Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits was a way that I basically walked through a case study so you could understand that building block. So think of this as the joy of cooking. There are thousands of recipes, and I think the amount of money that's been moved over with the financial coup d'etat has been very significant. If you want to keep reading, another good one to read is The Myth of the Rule of Law, which I published with a money management firm in London in the early 2000s. Something that and where would the money be utilized? If you listen to the Farrell interview and the crowdfunding interviews, I describe that. I think it will be used to integrate new technology and build out what I'm calling the digital heartland. And I think a great deal of that investment has gone into invisible weaponry and the black budget. And I also think now we're going to build out a significant investment into space. So I think whether black budget, digital heartland, or space, we're going to start seeing a very significant rollout of investments. And I would encourage you to listen to the Farrell and crowdfunding to hear a little bit more about that. Something that I would find very valuable for Catherine to cover on the Solari interview would be to interview someone who can tell us specific jobs or businesses they believe will be expanding in the coming years. Great idea. Thank you. I'm going to be looking for someone to do that. In your opinion, what is the Fed trying to accomplish by constantly telling us that they're going to end quantitative easing and then constantly reversing themselves? I don't really think they did reverse themselves. I think they know they would like to taper. I think when Bernanke talked about tapering, he was trying to get the market ready for tapering. I think they looked at the numbers up against their targets and said, okay, it doesn't make sense to taper yet. A question from Michael in Washington, who's got a regulated business under the new Washington rules allowing cannabis businesses to go forward. He wants to know, can crowdfunding make a source of capital for these highly regulated sectors, and points out that currently crowdfunding is requiring a verifiable investor. I would note that the rules related to verifiable investors I find deeply invasive and uncomfortable, and it's one of the reasons that people may not go with crowdfunding. They may pick one of the other exemption pathways. I had attorney Carolyn Betts write a wonderful piece on the different pathways of exemption in addition to crowdfunding that is up on the blog, and a link to the blog post for this Solari report. And just remember, we don't have the regulations on crowdfunding yet, so we don't know what it will look like. I suspect that if the regulations do not make it comfortable for highly regulated sectors to do crowdfunding coming out of the bat, I think over time it will be adapted. So yes, my expectation is probably, but take a look at those 5 other pathways, because there could easily be another exemption which is going to be a lot more comfortable for you. Great question about how we get a popsicle index for the sub-Saharan Africa community. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'm going to be thinking about it. I encourage everyone else to do it. The popsicle index is, popsicles is a very uniquely American phenomenon. In Europe, they generally have no idea what a popsicle is, even though the name popsicle is owned by a European food company. So I do think it would be good to come up with sort of other indexes that not only allow us to look at the well-being of the living capital within a place, but in a way where the people in that place control their estimation or their calculation of the index, as opposed to academic experts who are funded by bankers. And that was one of the driving forces behind the popsicle index. Catherine, thank you for your providing excellent reports on financial, political, and economic matters. I have a question. How safe are Series I bonds as an investment right now? Good question. I think right now the federal credit is a reasonably safe place to be. If you can print money to replace, to replace or refinance, then you really have no problem. The real issue is purchasing power. Of course, to me, the big issue, of course, is interest rates. If interest rates are headed up, you do not want to have long maturities. So I think the federal credit is safe for now, but interest rates makes being in anything other than short maturities very uncomfortable. And as that situation continues, we're going to see more and more people literally say, I'd rather be in a good dividend yielding stock or real estate investment than in bonds. I'd rather live with the volatility than have to suffer rising interest rates. question in regard to why are Glenn Greenwald and Charlie Rose so lucky, which is an article up on commentary that we published last week that I wrote. I think one of the reasons that Glenn Greenwald and Charlie Rose have been able to publish things that are extremely critical of the NSA or the Syria policy is because we have very powerful and important players behind the scenes protecting them and allowing them to do so. And one of my votes for those players is the Vatican. I talk a little bit more about that with in the crowdfunding interview in the first part of that, which is the big picture. I just heard your discussion with Franklin about Amazon as one of the only sources of used books online. There's another great one, Abe Books. It used to be Advanced Book Exchange, I think. It has listings from booksellers around the world and lists millions of books. Great tip. Thank you very much. AbeBooks.com. I'm going to go check it out and start to use it. Thank you. Too late for Franklin's discussion, so maybe you and Chuck can touch on inflation. We're going to try and do that. It's a joy to know some photos by Solari artists. We try and find photos and graphic from Solari network artists. So if you're a Solari artist, please keep sending them in. We love to have them. Okay, our interview is on crowdfunding. It's divided in two parts. The first part is on the bigger picture. There was an interview in Yahoo. I talk about it in our crowdfunding interview. It was up on Yahoo 2 days ago, and I took a snapshot. When I took it, it said, what's better for society if the wealthy give money to charities, to taxes, to create business? The poll when I took it said 10% said give money to charities, 28% said give money or pay money for taxes, 62% said help create businesses. And I think that's a very important signal, because that's sort of my experience with the general population. I think there's a real recognition that we have cash piling up among the wealthy and cash piling up among corporations, and they're struggling to find investment opportunities. And one of the reasons is we've used criminal means and government rigging and wasted a huge amount of government resources to kind of implode and harvest the general population. And now we're staring at a situation and say, what are we going to do? And there's no doubt about it that for many, many decades, we've had an enormous demand for small business investment and liquidity within small business equity. And that dam is finally about to break. So I talk about the fundamental economics behind it, and then the extent to which I see there's being an enormous political agenda coming top down to try and channel that economic demand in ways that serve the leadership and the wealthy. And so the first part of the interview is the longer one, because it's so important to me that you see the game, particularly if crowdfunding is something that you're going to participate in as an entrepreneur and investor. And then the second part of the interview, which we've divided into a second audio, is to look at things from the point of view of the investor or the entrepreneur. What does it mean to you? We've spent a great deal of time. We have extensive resources in the subscriber part of the blog post, because the discussion draws on many of the different things we've done. So I'm hoping this is a whole resource center for people who are going to be considering using crowdfunding or consider investing in it. And I think if I could say one thing, this is going to be a very significant shift of capital, and it's one where I expect every person listening to this call is going to, and listening to this recording, is going to be approached by multiple people in your family, your friends, your network, and your community. And many of you will see opportunities to not just invest, but start to create the kind of capacity we want and need in areas like building a fresh food supply locally. So this is going to be, as Ed Sullivan used to say, this is going to be really, really big. Our movie tonight is in Let's Go to the Movies, is The Startup Kid, which is a wonderful little documentary put together by two Icelandic entrepreneurs who started their own company after the crash in 2008 and then decided to travel around the world and talk to other young web entrepreneurs in the hopes of inspiring them to start their own companies. and it's really a delightful documentary, and it talks about the many of the thrills and the perils of starting your own company. So check it out, Startup Kids. The trailer is in the blog post. Okay, that's it for this evening. In closing, just remember, we've got John Rappaport coming up next week, September 26th. Then I do the quarterly wrap-up on October 3rd. I'm going to be speaking to you from the Casey Conference out in Arizona. If there are things you want me to cover up, how do you like that? If there are things you want me to cover in the wrap-up, please let me know. And so if there are things you don't want me to talk about, please let me know. That's our chance to sit back and look at the primary trends and how we're doing up against the primary trends. October 10th, a very exciting one. It's our Coming Clean for the month. It's a beginner's guide to 3D printing, and I have a wonderful engineer who helps me with reviewing and researching innovation in different industries, and I think you're really going to find that to be helpful as you watch this explosion of interest in articles on 3D printing. So until I talk to you again with a wrap-up on October 3rd, please remember, don't worry about whether or not there is a conspiracy. If you're not in a conspiracy, you need to start one. Ladies and gentlemen, good night and good luck.